Shall we start?
Yes.
Okay, let's start. It is a joy to introduce again one of these periodic webinars where we reflect on the Taiji Men case and the meaning of justice, conscience, and peace in our world. Today, we gather in the spirit of the United Nations World Day of Social Justice. In 2025, it generated significant documents and papers around that year's theme, strengthening a just transition for a sustainable future. It reminded us that social justice and ecological sustainability are inseparable. Scholars increasingly agree that ecology is not a separate issue from justice. It is one of its foundations. When the environment collapses, it is always the most vulnerable communities, human and non-human, who suffer first and suffer most. I have just returned from a long journey in Africa, devoted to two of my lifelong passions, freedom of religion or belief and endangered animal species. These two concerns may seem distant from each other, yet the more I travel, the more I see how deeply they are connected. Justice is never one-dimensional. It is a tapestry woven from respect for nature, cultures, and dignity of every being. One of the most moving moments of my trip was in Rwanda, where my wife Rosita and I visited Volcanoes National Park. This extraordinary place is home to roughly 40% of the world's remaining 1,000 mountain gorillas. These magnificent beings share 98% of their DNA with us. Without entering into debates about evolution, and no doubt Marco Respinti will remind us that that 2% is crucial, it is impossible not to feel a profound kinship when you look into their eyes. These are the only animals who mourn their dead. They gather into a deceased relative in what observers have described as a kind of ritual. They show tenderness, loyalty, and grief. Much of what we know about mountain gorillas comes from the work of Dian Fossey, the American primatologist who lived among the Rwandan gorillas for many years. Her life was portrayed in the 1988 Hollywood film Gorillas in the Mist, which Sigourney Weaver played Fossey. Fossey's research revolutionized our understanding of gorillas, but her greatest legacy was her fight against poachers and corrupted politicians and bureaucrats that profited from the destruction of wildlife. Thanks to her, the gorilla population in Rwanda has not disappeared, but is slowly increasing. Fossey was murdered in 1985. Although Rwandan authorities accused her research assistant, few in the West believed this explanation. Her struggle had injured influential political and economic actors. What is less known is that Fossey also defended the rights and culture of the local communities. She understood that protecting the gorillas required protecting the people who lived near them. Some of the politicians who opposed her were later implicated in the 1994 Rwanda genocide. Her life is a testament to the profound link between ecological justice and social justice. Rosita and I visited the Fossi Museum in Kinigi after a long, muddy trek to meet a gorilla family, actually two families greeting each other. It was an emotional experience. Standing there, we felt how deeply intertwined the protection of nature, culture, and conscience is. As a Roman Catholic, I am reminded of the Church teaching on human ecology, which insists that care for nature and care for human rights are inseparable. Freedom of religion or belief is part of this human ecology. Communities have the right to protect their environment, its forests, its animals, its sacred spaces, and to protect their culture, including their spirituality. This brings me back to Taiwan, the 228 incident and the Taijimen case. The February 28 incident of 1947 was in many ways a tragedy born from the Kuomintang's disregard for the rights, identity, and culture of local Taiwanese communities. It was a violation of human ecology. And in post-authoritarian Taiwan, the Taijimen case has been another such violation. For nearly 3 decades, a peaceful spiritual community has been subjected to fabricated accusations, unjust tax bills, and the nationalization of sacred land. In 2020, land that is essential to Taijimen's identity and includes a sacred bamboo forest was nationalized based on a tax theory that courts had already declared unfounded. This was not only a legal injustice, it was an ecological and cultural injustice. It was a wound to the community's spiritual environment, its heritage, its human ecology. The struggles of Taijimen and the struggle of Dian Fossey are, of course, very much different in their circumstances, but they share a common passion for justice. They both show that social justice is not a simple or narrow concept. It includes ecological sustainability, cultural rights, fairness, freedom of religion or belief, and the right of communities to live in harmony with their environment. The World Day of Social Justice invites us to imagine a world where development does not destroy culture, where progress does not trample conscience, and where economic interests do not silence spiritual communities. A just transition requires more than new technologies. It requires a transformation of the heart. It requires conscience. Taijimen has always thought that conscience is humanity's compass. And indeed, the conscience is what unites all these struggles. The conscience of Dian Fossey defending the gorillas, the conscience of local Rwandan communities protecting their land, the conscience of Taijimen resisting injustice with peace and dignity, the conscience of all those who believe that a sustainable future must be a just future. As we honor the World Day of Social Justice, we are reminded that justice is not abstract. It is lived in the forest of Rwanda, in the sacred bamboo groves of Taiwan, in the hearts of all who refuse to accept injustice as normal. The resilience of Taijimen is part of a global movement of conscience, a movement that insists that human dignity, cultural identity, and ecological harmony must be protected together. May we all continue this journey with courage, compassion, and unwavering commitment to justice. And now, before starting the first session, we have two videos of wishes for the Chinese New Year. One from UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, and one from the Shifu or Grandmaster of Taiji Men, Dr. Rong Daozi.
Happy Lunar New Year. As we welcome the Year of the Horse, we celebrate a symbol of energy, success, and the courage to forge ahead, qualities our world urgently needs as we confront conflict, inequality, and the climate crisis. This season of renewal reminds us that together we can build a safer, more inclusive future. Let us continue to advance our shared commitment to peace, dignity, and sustainable development for all. May the spirit of the horse bring you health, happiness, and prosperity.
Thank you for the beautiful videos. And we start now the scholarly papers of the first session with a new friend, Dr. Brandon Rees Taylorian, Associate Lecturer and Research Fellow at the School of Psychology and Humanities, University of Lancashire, United Kingdom. So, Dr. Brandon Rees Taylorian, the floor is yours.
Thank you to Professor Massimo Infravigna and to Taiji Men for this invitation. My ongoing research asks a deceptively simple question, and that is, to what degree do recognition and registration systems shape real conditions for freedom of religion or belief? This is not in theory, but in the everyday life of communities. And my central claim is that recognition and registration are often treated as administrative or technical matters, yet in practice they function as powerful mechanisms that can widen or shrinken the space in which belief communities can exist. So as part of my paper today, which is titled No Social Justice Without Freedom of Religion or Belief, State Recognition, Registration, and the Taijimen Case, today I want to make 3 points. The first is that recognition and registration are distinct, but in practice they interact in ways that can quietly produce inequality. Second, because these mechanisms look bureaucratic, they can cause harm without appearing like persecution. Yet the impact can still be profound, including surveillance, stigmatization of unrecognized or unregistered groups, financial punishment, and the erosion of legal personality. Third, I will argue that the Taijimen case is a particularly instructive example for the theme, no social justice without freedom of belief, because it shows how administrative and tax systems can become instruments of long-term restrictions of fundamental rights, even after criminal acquittals and in a context that is not usually framed as a classic authoritarian environment. So why recognition and registration matter for freedom of religion or belief? In my thesis, I distinguish recognition from registration. Recognition is the broader social and state practice of conferring legitimacy, status, or privilege on certain religions or beliefs. Registration is the more specific legal process by which an organization gains legal personality, the capacity to operate, of course, as an entity in law. But although the distinction matters conceptually, in real-world governance, the two often merge. Recognition shapes who gets access to registration, what benefits follow, and whether officials perceive a group as customary or suspicious. To clarify how registration regimes vary, I built the spectrum of religious registration. At the most FORB compliant end of that spectrum are optional registration regimes where groups may register for benefits but do not lose basic religious freedom if they remain unregistered. At the most restrictive end, the opposite end, are broad mandatory registration regimes where unregistered activity is criminalized and communities can be punished simply for existing outside state supervision. Crucially, my research suggests that governments often treat registration not merely as a means of record keeping, but as a gatekeeping mechanism. It can be used to decide what are real religions, who is legitimate, and who may access public funds and public spaces. Where registration becomes coercive, the state's message is your rights are conditional on our approval. That is precisely where social justice concerns begin. Number two, how administrative systems create real-world harm. One reason these issues are underestimated is that the harms are not always dramatic or instantly visible to us. They frequently appear as excessive paperwork, delays, intrusive demands for information from religious groups trying to gain registration, and rules around tax and property, strict rules. Yet these soft mechanisms can have hard outcomes. In my thesis, I describe how registration systems can enable surveillance and enforcement. Information demanded during registration, such as addresses, leadership details, membership information, can be repurposed for monitoring, intimidation, and building cases against religious groups considered undesirable. And where registration is made onerous, uncertain, or endlessly delayed, the effect can be to keep a community in a permanent grey zone, not outright banned, but never legalized. To capture variation in severity, I developed a scale of rights violations ranging from minor harms like unequal access to tax benefits through to sort of more grave harms like systematic violence and more extreme forms of punishment. The point of my scale is that FORB violations often escalate and interlocked with interlock with other rights: property rights, fair trial rights, freedom of association, and also dignity. What matters for today is this: financial and administrative pressure can be a form of coercion, even when it is framed as sort of a routine enforcement. If social justice means meaningful equality and non-discrimination, then a system that repeatedly imposes disproportionate burdens on a religious or belief community through tax, penalties, seizures, or denial of legal standing should be treated as social justice issues, not merely as a kind of technical dispute. A social justice lens legal personality as civic oxygen. Registration, or legal personality, can be understood as a kind of civic oxygen in a way. Without it, communities struggle to rent venues, hold property, run educational or cultural activities, fundraise, or challenge unfair treatment in court. My interviews with minority faith members and leaders repeatedly return to this practical reality that legal status does not merely add convenience, it determines whether a community can operate without fear. This connects directly to the UN Day of Social Justice theme of this event. Social justice requires not only formal rights on paper, but institutional conditions in which communities can actually act, sort of organise, speak, assemble, teach, transmit their traditions, and build community life. When states or bureaucracies within states treat religious or belief communities as suspect, abnormal, or culturally illegitimate, they can use administrative and fiscal mechanisms to apply pressure while insisting that this is not about religion. That denial is itself a pattern worth naming because it obscures the lived reality of discrimination. This brings me to Taiji Men. From the case materials publicly available, the core narrative is well known. Taiji Men is described as a martial arts and spiritual self-cultivation movement which faced criminal accusations in the 1990s and later prolonged conflict through tax bills, especially the unresolved 1992 tax bill. In 2007, Taiwan's Supreme Court confirmed the defendants were innocent of the criminal charges, including tax-related allegations, and characterized the red envelopes as gifts given out of gratitude rather than taxable tuition. Yet despite subsequent developments and despite tax bills for other years being corrected to zero, the 1992 tax bill remained a focal point used to justify enforcement actions culminating in property seizures and nationalisation of land in 2020. What makes Taiji Men analytically significant, especially through the lens of my thesis, is that it exemplifies a phenomenon I would call administrative persistence. When a community is effectively kept under a long shadow by bureaucratic mechanisms, even after key adjudications appear to clear the underlying wrongdoing narrative. In terms of my scale that I developed, one can see how the harm is not only reputational, but material for Taiji Men. Financial penalties, property seizures, and the punitive effect on civil participation. This is why many human rights advocates describe the case not just as a legal dispute, but as a social justice issue, because unequal or retaliatory enforcement produces long-term inequality, even without overt bans on worship. A question often raised in cases like this is this really a concern for FORB or just a taxation matter? My response, consistent with the framework of my thesis, is that FORB is routinely mediated through institutional conditions and taxation and property control among the most powerful institutional levers a state possesses. When tax mechanisms are applied in a way that appears uniquely sustained against a specific religious or belief community, such as in the case of Taiji Men, and when the effects include seizure of land associated with the community's life and activities, the issue becomes inseparable from freedom of religion or belief in practice. In my thesis's terms, even systems that are not broad mandatory registration can still become restrictive if administrative and fiscal rules are used to narrow what is possible for a community to do. The movement from unequal treatment toward coercive enforcement is therefore a recognizable escalation pattern. Let me end with brief practical implications that I want to frame around the principle I discuss in my thesis, the maximization of rights. The idea that states should structure their recognition and registration systems so that the fullest scope of FORB can be enjoyed and not treated as a privilege conditional on administrative preference. A social justice response to cases like Taiji Men would include at least 4 commitments. Number 1, clarity and finality in administrative handling after judicial decisions, so that acquittal and authoritative rulings are not undermined by endless residual enforcement. Number 2, non-discrimination in fiscal governance of religious or belief communities, including careful scrutiny where enforcement patterns appear exceptional or punitive. Number 3, protection of legal personality and civic space, recognizing that when property and finances are threatened, the community's ability to exist entirely is threatened also. And number 4, FORB literacy within administrations needs to improve so that officials understand how seemingly technical decisions can generate real rights violations over time. To conclude, the Taiji Men case matters beyond Taiwan because it demonstrates a wider truth that my research repeatedly encountered across contexts. Registration, recognition, and administrative governance are not neutral. They can facilitate pluralism, but they can also become instruments of exclusion. If social justice is about fair participation in society, then freedom of religion or belief is not a side issue. It is one of the conditions that makes social justice possible. And Taiji Men is an important reminder that the struggle for freedom of religion or belief is sometimes waged not only in criminal courts or through overt bans, but through the quieter machinery of administration. This is why the theme, no social justice without freedom of belief, is an accurate diagnosis. When a religious or belief community can be financially and administratively restricted for decades, social justice has not been achieved, regardless of what the formal constitutional language says. Thank you very much for your attention today.
Thank you, Dr. Taylorian. And now we pass to the second speaker of the first session, Dr. Michele Olzi, teaching assistant to the course of religion and media and temporary research fellow in political theory at the University of Insubria in Italy. Michele, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Massimo. Thank you for having me here. Thank you to Taiji Men for today. The case of a systematic persecution of the Taiji Men constitutes one of the most persistent and controversial examples of conflict between citizens and state institutions in the recent history of Taiwan. For 3 decades, as we've seen, members of the movement have been subjected to arrests, judicial proceedings, repeated tax sanctions, and ongoing public delegitimization, despite favorable court decisions in 2007-2018 that recognized their innocence, the lawful nature of their practices, and the absence of tax evasion. This long sequence of repressive interventions cannot be adequately understood as mere accumulation of administrative or judicial errors. Rather, it reveals a systematic persecution that has deeply affected the dignity, identity, and autonomy of those involved. To critically analyze this phenomenon, Axel Honneth's theory of recognition provides a particularly fruitful conceptual framework. In contemporary debates on social justice, Honneth has focused less on the mere violation of formal rights and more on the social conditions that make individual and collective autonomy possible. According to this theory, autonomy is not a natural attribute of a subject, but the outcome of successful processes of socialization grounded in relations of recognition. Society that can thus understood as an act of order of recognition, that is, a set of practices and institutions that promise individuals the confirmation of their moral and social worth. Hornet distinguishes three fundamental spheres of recognition. The first is that of love or care, which concerns the person's physical and psychological integrity and provides the basis for self-confidence. The second is the legal sphere, in which the recognition of rights guarantees self-respect by acknowledging individuals as equal members of this normative order. The third is the sphere of social esteem, which concerns the value attributed to individuals' capacities, contributions, and forms of life, thereby grounding self esteem. From this perspective, injustice manifests itself as a misrecognition or disrespect, that is, a partial or total denial of the forms of recognition necessary for the development of identity. Because when disrespect becomes embedded in institutional practices, uh, it takes the form of structural social domination. It is precisely at this level that the persecution of Taiji men can be interpreted. At the level of personal integrity, arrest, searches, intimidation, and prolonged legal uncertainty have produced insecurity, fear, and humiliation. In so doing, undermined the basic trust that the state ought to guarantee to its citizens. At the legal level, the persistence of punitive and fiscal actions, despite definitive favorable court rulings, amounts to a practical suspension of a recognition of the movement's dizi as full subjects of rights. This form of legal misrecognition directly affects self-respect, as it signals the formal equality before the law is not effectively ensured. Likewise, the sphere of social esteem is compromised. The public portrayal of Taiji man as a crime school or a deviant entity accused of fraud or even of raising goblins symbolically devalues the movement itself. In honest terms, such devaluation undermines the possibility of collective self-esteem by conveying to the movement's member that their contributions hold no value to the rest of the community. The combination of personal, legal, and social misrecognition thus constitutes a pathology of the order of recognition, where disrespect is endemic and systemic. Taiji Man's response to this situation has not taken violent forms. Still, it has instead it has instead been expressed through a long and persistent struggle for recognition. Legal appeals, public mobilization, and engagement with democratic institutions and international community, that the form that the reaction taken by part of the Taiji men. According to Hornet, social struggles emerge when disrespect is experienced as a moral injustice rather than as a mere misfortune. In this sense, Taiji man's resistance can be understood as a claim to dignity and to recognition as legitimate bearers of a form of life within the social order. This analysis acquires further significance when situated within the symbolic context of a commemoration of February 28, 1937, the date of the 228th incident massacre in Taipei and the Penghu Islands. The historical trauma represents for the Taiwanese a radical rupture in the order of recognition. The state ceased to treat part of its population as morally and politically legitimate subjects, responding to demands for recognition with mass violence. Without establishing improper equivalences, the memory of the 228 can function today as a critical criterion for identifying and preventing more subtle yet persistent forms of institutional misrecognition, such as one affecting Taijimen. In order to conclude, to offer some conclusion, some final considerations, this reflection in proximity to the commemoration of February 28 is to reaffirm that democratic justice does not consist solely in condemning the violence of the past, but also requires constant vigilance over present practices. Applying Hornet's theory of recognition to the Taijimen case allow us to question the capacity of institutions to learn from history and to remain faithful to fundamental promise of recognition, that is, to guarantee all citizens the social conditions of autonomy so that tragedies of misrecognition, old or new, are not repeated. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Michele Olzi, and that concludes the first session of our webinar. So I will now pass the mic to Willy Fautré, who will introduce the second video and then the 5 testimonies of the second session.
Thank you, Massimo. And now, as usual, we will go on with a second panel, usually put at the disposal of the DISI, the followers of Dr. Hong in Taijimen. But before we will watch a video, the title is A Judge's Struggle and Redemption.
Tax and Law Story Series. A Judge's Struggle and Redemption. This is a true story from Japan. Outside the courthouse, Hakamada Iwao's sister walked out with a sorrowful look, clutching tightly to a photo of the deceased. The man in that photo was Kumamoto Norimichi, one of the judges who presided over the Hakamada's case back in 1966. He was only 29 at the time. The case shocked the whole country. It involved the murder of a missile factory owner and his family of 4. The killer even set the scene on fire. Only the eldest daughter survived. A year into the investigation, the police claimed to have found the 5 pieces of blood-stained clothing in a missile barrel outside the crime scene. They suspected the clothes belonged to an employee, Hakamada. He was held at the police station, and after enduring endless, intense interrogation, he finally broke down and confessed. When Kumamoto examined the prosecution's evidence, he found huge holes in the confession and couldn't make sense of the so-called 5 blood-stained clothes. But in the panel of 3 judges, the 2 senior judges were convinced Hakamada was guilty and deserved the death penalty. In the end, young Kumamoto had to go against his conscience and professional judgment and agree to the verdict. That decision haunted him for the rest of his life. 6 months later, he resigned as a judge and became a lawyer, but fell into alcoholism, went through a divorce, and even lost his license to practice. For years, he drifted through life. It wasn't until the early 2000s, encouraged by his later wife, that he finally found the courage to speak up. In 2007, he broke the rule of secrecy around verdict deliberations, went public, and swore to save Hakamada, who was still on death row. In 2014, the case was granted a retrial, and in mid-2023, the Shizuoka District Court declared Hakamada innocent. But Kumamoto never saw that day. He passed away in 2020. Even so, his courage and his refusal to let go of the truth delivered justice. Late but real. The power of the law lies in its fairness, and fairness rests on an unwavering pursuit of truth.
Thank you. And I must say that I always admire the work of those at Taiji Men who make such videos. The message, the narratives, it's always clear and very informative and educative as well. And so now, before giving the floor to some of the disease, I will make a short introduction, sharing with you my observations, my ideas concerning the topic of the day. The 20th of, the 20th of February today is the UN International Day of Social Justice, which was celebrated for the first time in 2007 and has been observed every year since then. The purpose of this commemoration is to remind us, world citizens, of the need to build fairer and more equitable societies. But this day also precedes by 1 week another tragic date for the Taiwanese, the 20th of February. In the calendar of Taiwan, the 20th of February 1947 is a landmark day that is associated with the brutal end of a short-lived attempt to establish democracy and social justice, which took place when a bloody conflict broke out between the political rulers of the country and their own people. It is related to a dark period of about 4 decades, during which social injustice prevailed. After 50 years of Japanese colonial rule, the end of the Second World War, and the taking of power by the Kuomintang-led nationalist government of President Chiang Kai-shek, an apparently minor incident set the powder keg on fire in Taiwan. On the evening of the 27th of February 1947, a Tobacco Monopoly Bureau enforcement team confiscated contraband cigarettes from a 40-year-old widow in a district of Taipei. While she was claiming them back, one of the men struck her with his gun. An angry crowd gathered to defend the victim. The agents ran away for safety, but one of them shot his gun into the crowd, hitting a bystander. For the Taiwanese people, which had already been overwhelmed by frustration from unemployment, inflation, corruption towards the nationalist movement, government, this was too much. The revolt soon spread through the country like a trail of fire. A few days later, martial law was declared and curfews were enforced. This conflict generated by social injustice, was the starting point of decades of dictatorship, the White Terror, as it was called. Under that regime, freedom of religion or belief was not banned, but it was tightly controlled and monitored. Sermons and publications were under scrutiny. Many people were persecuted, not for formal religious doctrines, but for beliefs expressed as moral criticism of social injustice and as a call for dignity. State institutions enforced ideological loyalty, making freedom of conscience and belief unsafe. In those times, if a religious group or leader was perceived as politically threatening, sanctions would be immediate. There would be arrests, imprisonments, interrogations under torture, and maybe executions. Loyalty to the political line of the state was prioritized over individual and collective rights, as well as social justice. Taiji men remained neutral in those dark times. This autocratic political culture did not immediately disappear when democracy started to progressively emerge out of the darkness of almost 40 years of dictatorship. Despite its political neutrality, Taiji men was persecuted by state institutions and administrations, which retaliated indiscriminately against all collective entities, religious or not, to keep their powers and privileges inherited from the White Terror period. The link between freedom of religion or belief and social justice is foundational. Societies that protect people's freedom to believe or not to believe are better able to achieve fairness, equality, and dignity for all. Freedom of belief affirms that every person's conscience has equal value. Social justice depends on this idea. If some beliefs are privileged while others are punished or silenced, inequality becomes built into the system. This principle is reflected in United Nations human rights framework, especially the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which treats freedom of thought, conscience, and religion as universal. Social injustice often targets groups whose beliefs differ from the majority, such as religious or belief minorities. They are often vulnerable to discrimination, stigmatization, exclusion from public life, violence, and even coercion. Taiji men has experienced most of the facets of social injustice. Social injustice from the media, which has massively destroyed the image of Taiji men in public opinion. Social injustice concerning the abusive arrest and imprisonment for months of the Shifu, the Shimu, and some of their close collaborators, while they were all declared innocent by the Supreme Court years later. Social injustice in the way they were treated by the prosecutor. Social injustice in the intense obstination mobilized by the tax administration and the judiciary to misuse a loophole in the implementation of the taxation administration so that they could continue to persecute and prosecute Taiji men. This is far from being an exhaustive list of social injustice acts perpetrated against Taiji men, but Dr. Hong and Taiji men imperturbably go on teaching and sharing their beliefs about conscience and peace for the best of humankind. Thank you for your attention. And I will now give the floor to the first speaker. The first speaker, if she can be announced, because we have a majority of women and girls this morning. Yeah. So, sorry for the pronunciation, but Yu Suan Sung, data engineer.
Hello, good day to the host and all panelists. Hello, I'm a data engineer, and my daily routine revolves around massive data set, complex logic, and automatic pipelines. And in my line of work, we know one thing for certain. If a bug appears in any part of the system and no one is willing to stop the process to debug it, and that error gets replicated and amplified, the final output is not just an incorrect result, it is a systemic disaster. And this experience makes me feel especially connected when reflecting on the UN International Day of Social Justice. And the core spirit of this day is to eradicate poverty, exclusion, and inequality, while ensuring equality before the law and protecting basic human rights. However, when we honestly examine the world today, we must admit an unsettling truth. In some countries that claim to uphold democracy and the rule of law, state machinery may still continue to produce persecution under the banner of lawful administration. And Dr. Hong Daozi, the Grandmaster of Taiji Men, once noted, the balance of justice lies in conscience, and conscience is the compass of conduct and the standard for helping the world. This strikes at the heart of social justice. No matter how perfect a system may appear, without the guidance of conscience, it is merely a tool of oppression. And let's turn to the video we just watched, The Struggle and Redemption of a Judge, which details a verdict of justice delayed by 48 years. In 1966, Iwao Hakamada was forced to sign a false confession after 20 days of grueling interrogation and lasting over 12 hours a day, and he was sentenced to death and grew old on a death row. Waiting for justice never came. What truly changed his fate was not merely the completion of legal procedures, but an awakening of conscience. In 2014, a judge presiding over the request for a retrial, citing a new DNA evidence, stated clearly, continuing to detain Hakamada clearly violates justice, and the weight of that sentence exceeded any legal statute. It presented a judge choosing to acknowledge that the system had erred, and that a human being should not be the sacrificial lamb for lost errors. Although prosecutor appealed repeatedly to block justice, the Tokyo High Court finally upheld the retrial in 2023, excluding the coerced confession. Ultimately, the judge chose conscience, admitting the state's mistake, and finally, in September 2024, the Shizuoka District Court declared the 88-year-old Iwao Hakamada innocent. And now, let's look at Taiwan in 1996. Taiji Men became the target of a politically motivated purge led by a prosecutor. In false accusation of fraud and tax evasion. After years of litigation, the Supreme Court issued a final decision in 2007 and declaring Taiji Men innocent of all charges and free of tax liabilities, recognizing that the deeds, red envelope were gifts and therefore tax exempt. And the defendants even received state compensation for wrongful imprisonment in 2009. And by logical or legal standard, the case should have ended there, yet the administrative system to accept it and stop its wrongdoings. The tax authority disregarded the Supreme Court's ruling and continued issue tax bills based on the indictment that had already been rejected by the court, creating an absurd situation rarely seen in the history of legal systems worldwide, a fabricated case treated as if it were real. As an engineer, I look at the data in the 60-year history of Taijimen, involving the exact same facts. Only the years 1991 to 1996 were targeted. 5 of those years were eventually corrected to 0. Yet the year 1992 remains subject to enforcement. This is a logical impossibility. It is a system output that makes no sense. If the Hakamada case stole 48 years from one man, the Taijimen case has stolen 30 years from 3 generations of families. This is not just an abstract legal debate. It is children growing up in the shadow of fear and parents aging under the crushing weight of injustice. If a democratic and law-abiding country allows innocent people to be harmed by public authorities for over 30 years and still refuses to face justice and the truth, the future of the nation is concerning. This issue concerns not only the Taijimen Shifu and Dizi, but also all the people of Taiwan. The truth is eventually coming to light. A tax collector who had collaborated with the prosecution to provide false testimony admitted that his deathbed, that the entire case was a staged performance. Yet despite this, the state chose to look away, even forcibly auctioning and nationalizing Taijimen's land in 2020. In Taiwan, this is not merely a domestic rule of law issue. It is a matter of international human rights. The European Court of Human Rights once ruled against the French government, ordering the return of unjust taxes collected from the religious group. If other democracies can admit their mistake and make amends through actions, Taiwan has all the more reason to learn from and emulate them, aligning its rule of law and human rights with international standards to let the world witness the achievements of Taiwan's democracy. People often wonder, if the law exists, why isn't it solved? From an engineer's view, my observation is this: we don't lack rules, we lack people who have the courage to press the stop button on the faulty process. Legal statutes, administrative procedure acts, and taxpayer protection laws already exist. But if every official chooses to follow precedent or say, "Oh, this is not my responsibility," the system becomes a runaway machine with no brakes. The Hakamada case proves that only when judges listen to their conscience does the system engage its repair mechanisms. On this UN International Day of Social Justice, we must ask, who should be held accountable for these 30 years of lost youth? Admitting error is not a national shame. It is proof of a mature democracy. Justice should not be an endurance race. We can no longer let anyone spend a lifetime waiting for a simple "I'm sorry." The Taijimen case is a litmus test, challenging Taiwan to find the courage to correct its mistake and return to the baseline of human rights and conscience. Hereby, I call for conscience to once again become the most important error prevention mechanism within the national system, and I wish with conscience comes a peaceful world, with happiness a joyful family. Thank you.
And so thank you very much, Yu Suan Sung. You are a data engineer, and I like very much your first comparison that you made between the denial of justice to Taijimen on the one hand, and on the other hand, with a debug in the Taiwanese state machinery. The final output of the judiciary was not just an incorrect result. It was an alert and a symptom of a systemic disaster, as many Taiwanese have been victims of the tax administration. I also like your second comparison with that man who was forced to sign a false confession after 20 days of grueling interrogation, lasting over 12 hours per day, although he was innocent. And he had to wait on the death row for 48 years until 2023 before getting justice. Tajimen is also on this such a long way, long and bumpy road in its quest for justice. And I hope that it will not have to wait for such a long time. And in both cases, nonviolent resistance and resilience are the values that they have cherished and believed in. And they must be admired as well as with such resilience and resistance. So thank you again. And now I will give the floor to Melody Fu, an administrative assistant.
Hey. Hello, everyone. It's an
Hello,
honor to
Melody.
be. Hello. Okay, it's an honor to be here on the International Day of Social Justice to reflect together on a question that goes beyond borders. In society that think themselves as a democratic and governed by the rule of law, how does actually justice happen? I would like to begin with a case from Taiwan, but the issues it reveals are not equal to Taiwan. There are challenges that many societies around the world have faced or are still facing. At the end of 2025, Taipei hosted a public exhibition called 1219 Escape Route, 30 years after authoritarian rule toward the lights. Instead of using traditional displays, the exhibition turned nearly 30 years of human rights related judicial cases into immersive experiences, such as escape rooms, interactive puzzles, and AR technology. Through a first-person perspective, participants were able to experience how institutions can fail at a critical moment. In just 9 days, more than 15,000 people participated, and the exhibition received wide media coverage. This shows something important. When an issue is made visible and understandable, human rights and justice are no longer distant ideas. They become public concerns that people can truly connect with. I also served as a guide for this exhibition. For many participants, it was the first time they realized that even in a society seen as a modern democracy, wrongful cases caused by systematic failure can still exist and remain unresolved for decades. What shocked them was not history, but something happened here and now. One room left a particularly strong impression on me. Participants first saw a scene representing institutional reform and legal progress. It felt as if justice had already been achieved. Then they were led into a completely dark space, where they learned that even when systems appear sound, some people have still not received justice. But at the end of the darkness, there was an exit toward the light, a reminder that justice may be delayed, but whether we move towards it is always our choice. The significance of this exhibition goes beyond a single case. It reveals a broader truth. Justice does not happen automatically just because institutions exist. Only when injustice continues to be seen and discussed can real change begin. History and modern society offers many similar examples. In late Qing Dynasty, the case of Yang Naiwu and Little Cabbage nearly became a irreversible tragedy due to torture and procedural abuse. What truly led to their ignoration was not eternal correction within the system, but public attention. People spreading the word, creating social pressure, and forcing those in power to face the truth. The American sinologist Jonathan Ogg has also pointed out that the newspaper 申报 played a crucial watchdog role, contributing significantly to the final reversal of the case. A more recent example is Japan's Moritomo Gakuen scandal. The improper sale of the state land and the falsification of the official documents were exposed through sustained media coverage and parliamentary scrutiny, ultimately forcing the governments to admit wrongdoings. These cases come from different cultures and systems, but they share the same lesson. When power loses checks and balances, the external oversight is missing. Institutions rarely correct themselves. But we also need to face another question honestly. If attention is so crucial, why do people so often choose to silence instead? I believe this had to do with two very common ideas of human nature. The first is, this has nothing to do with me. People often see systematic problems as distant until the harm reaches them personally. But just like preventive medicine, we don't value health only after we become sick. Social justice should not wait until our rights are violated either. Choosing to understand and pay attention before harm reaches us is in itself a form of prevention. The second is, it does concern me, but I'm afraid to speak up. The people's fear of prosecution by the government through the exercise of public power is real. But when fear becomes a reason for silence, injustice remains hidden. Justice has never been a cost-free choice, but history shows us again and again that the cost of silence is often far greater. From this exhibition to historical wrongful cases and contemporary public events, we see the same message. Justice is not naturally produced by institutions. It emerges through persistent media scrutiny and sustained attention from civil society. What the Taijimen case represents is not just the experience of one group of people. It poses a question to all of us. When institutions fail, are we willing to let our conscience guide us, to see, to care, to stop being bystander, and to speak up? Because justice only begins when we stop being bystanders. Thank you for your attention.
And thank you very much, Melody, for sharing your reflections with us about why people keep silent when they are faced with injustice. Why do they keep silence and don't take any actions? The reasons that you put forward have already been identified by Pastor Niemöller before and during World War II in Nazi Germany. His famous saying, first they came for the socialists and I didn't speak out because I was not a socialist, etc., etc. This saying is really famous. And that pastor in Germany under Hitler was imprisoned by the Nazis already in 1937, so several years before the war started, until 1945, at the end of the war. He was in detention for speaking against Hitler and denouncing him as a dictator. He did not keep silent. But as you said, silence has never been a cost-free choice. And the cost of silence is often far greater when it only happens later on that people start speaking. Stop being bystanders and speak, you said in your conclusive call. I totally agree with you. Thank you very much for your contribution to the debate. And now I will introduce the third Dizzy, Winnie Lou. an elementary school counselor.
Host, fellow speaker, and all friends join online. Good afternoon. Today is February 2026, the United Nations World Day of Social Justice. This year's theme is Empowering Inclusion, Bridging Gaps for Social Justice. Standing at this juncture of rapid digital and technological expansion, we need the benevolences and warmth of the human heart as a balance. Let technology begin with humanity, not only making lives more convenient, but also allowing positive role models to have a deeper and a wider impact. While we are accustomed to our own daily life, we must also reflect, has justice truly reached every corner of society? As an elementary school counselor, what I witness daily in the counseling room and campus corner is another form of injustice and requires more warmth and social attention. The unequal distribution of the right to mental health and the children and parents struggling within the cracks of system. In the elementary schools, student adjustment difficulties are often a microcosm of society. We frequently see children with neurodiversity such as attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, autism, or anxiety disorders facing severe frustration as their biological traits clash with a standardized education system. My Shifu, Dr. Hong Daozi, once stated in a public speech, conscience is the compass of the soul, guiding people to find right direction in chaotic world. As an educator, I believe that the awareness of caregivers defines the children's direction. When primary caregiver refuse to acknowledge a child's biological need due to a lack of information, social prejudice, or the stigma surrounding mental illness, this compass loses its way. A child born into an empowered family can access early intervention, while a child born into a family filled with prejudice is labeled as naughty or lazy, facing systemic marginalization, the deprivation of the right to grow, caused by a gap in awareness, is the first justice gap we must bridge. Since my university years, I have been practicing Qigong and studying the wisdom of Yin Yang philosophy under my Shifu, Dr. Hong Daozi, at the Taijinmen Qigong Academy. Through the practice Qigong, I can relax my mind. I also collaborate with my fellow brothers and sisters to produce public interest program on tax and legal reform, calling on the public to value the protection of their rights. Over the years, I have gradually come to understand that the wisdom of balance is the key to maintain justice. That enables me to guide students through challenges with a macro perspective, working alongside professional teams to support children's growth. For instance, when facing a student with
mind, intellectual disability, and autism who cries out of frustration. I can understand his difficulty in expressing and regulating emotions. Then I use simple methods such as sketching or observing plants to guide him in shifting his mood and expanding his coping strategies. Gradually, the student's performance has become more stable. Consequently, children's adaptation difficulties are not isolated problem. They require the support of the entire ecosystem. For instance, educators are influential people in a child's school life. Beyond transmitting knowledge, teachers should also be energy prisoners in the school. When teachers can see the struggles of children due to their physiological limitation, have a little more tolerance, and give a little more encouragement, a small society of empowering inclusion can be created in the classroom. Sensory pressure on a campus, such as excessively low bill and complex visual stimuli, poses a significant burden for children with diverse neurodevelopmental traits. Minor environmental adjustments are essential to create space that accommodated various neurodevelopmental needs. Furthermore, defining a good student solely by academic performance is a form of bullying against the diversity of life. We must break away from singular status and foster a culture where every child can find self-esteem in diverse fields. Varying multiple dimension of worth is a vital piece of social engineering for the prevention of mental illness. I believe that safeguarding elementary school children's mental health should be recognized as a fundamental human right. Mental health should not be a luxury item. We must reflect on how quality psychological counseling should actively intervene through social administration resources to proactively provide mental empowerment to vulnerable families. Moving from persecution to cultural empowerment. As Dr. Hong has said, good culture makes good education. We want to promote a culture of conscience, so that society no longer views mental illness with discriminatory eyes, but with an inclusive attitude, treating difference as the colors of life, connecting with significant others, constructing a safety net. Schools, family, and society should jointly cooperate to form a tight, conscious alliance to resist the secondary harm caused to children by social justice and institutional injustice. When discussing protecting children from systemic harm, we must address the immense injustice within our society. In learning about love and peace with my Shifu, I have witnessed the long unresolved trauma of the rule of law. The Taijinmen case, a case just and belief-based persecution that began in Taiwan in 1996, has persisted for 30 years. At the time, the National Taxation Bureau cooperated with this human rights violation to issue illegal tax bill and has refused to revoke them for 3 decades, repeatedly violating human rights and rule of the law. This is not only a refusal by government bureaucrats to reflect on and correct their mistakes, but also a terrible example for government, renowned for democracy and human rights, inflicting fundamental damage on those very values. When a government, knowing persecutes human rights yet fabricates reason to refuse correction, it deals a massive blow to social mental health and trust. It serves as an automatic negative education for the people, undermining the foundation of national development. I call upon a Taiwanese government to implement administration with conscience, revoke the illegal tax bill, and return sacred land for spiritual practice that was confiscated from Taijinmen, Shifu, and Dizi. Only when the government demonstrated the courage and action to right the wrong can social justice truly be realized and the gap in social justice can be bridged. This is not just for Taijinmen, but for building a future where our children can breathe the air of fairness and justice. Every advocacy we make in counseling sessions, and every call against nation injustice are all practice of social justice. Let us uphold conscious love and peace taught by Dr. Hong Daozi, starting with ourselves and become the significant others in children's lives. May conscience guide the way, and may justice be realized in the human world. Through the wisdom of a kind thought, we bridge the gap between law, education, and the mind, collective safeguarding the future of the next generation. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, and thank you, Winnie Lou, for your approach of the social injustice issues through the lens of your profession. Education is a serious and a sacred mission, especially when it concerns young children. In elementary schools, children's adaptation difficulties are often a microcosm of a social injustice, you said, and empathy is really needed to serve justice. According to you, the fight for equal rights to mental health highlights cracks in the system of social justice in Taiwan, and only the wisdom of balance is key to maintaining justice. Conscience in administration and the courage to rectify chaos and restore order are key to a government which wants to heal collective spiritual trauma and to truly bridge the gap in social justice. But there must be enough political will for the government to be successful. And that remains, of course, a big question mark. Thank you again. And now I will give the floor to Yu Ting Ni, a software project manager. You're welcome.
Hello, my name is Yu Ting. Thanks
Hello.
for having me. It's truly an honor to participate in this forum and on this meaningful occasion of the United Nations World Day of Social Justice. We gather on this international platform not merely for academic discussion, but to speak on behalf of those who have long been ignored and silenced beneath the towering structure of public power. Social justice has never been an abstract concept. It is about how institutions treat people and whether they are capable of truly correcting mistakes and stopping harm when injustice has occurred. To me, social justice means that every individual can live with dignity, fairness, and respect. It's not only about the eradication of poverty or equality of rights, but also about whether public power, when exercised, protects the most vulnerable or instead becomes a source of oppression and fear. When we speak of social injustice caused by public authority, the voices of refugees on the world offers a stark and painful illustration. Some time ago, I watched a video online in which the creator traveled to the Israel-Palestine region to interview civilians struggling to survive amid ongoing conflict. The interviewer described how restriction on freedom and economic insecurity have become part of their daily lives. One thing left a particularly deep impression on me. A resident explained that in such an environment, people must learn how to adapt to cruelty. One day, a loved one might be killed in an airstrike. The next day, life must go on as if nothing happened. When asked what they most wished to do if peace were to finally arrive, their answers were not about revenge, but about the simplest of dreams, to walk freely, to travel, and to make friends across different communities. As one interviewee said, we are all human in the end, and love will conquer everything. This reminds us profoundly that war is often the result of decisions made by a small group of those in power, while countless civilians bear the most direct and enduring consequences. War represents the most unjust distributions of the right to survive under public authority. However, the crisis of social justice does not exist only in war zones. Even in democratic society without gunfire, when administrative power loses restraint and relief mechanisms become ineffective, another form of violence emerges. It does not draw blood, but through taxation system, administrative penalties, procedural delays, and invasion of responsibility, it traps people in long-term fear and exhaustion. In Taiwan, the Taijimen case is exactly a typical example. This case involves over 30 years of tax persecution affecting tens of thousands of people, and its absurdity exposed deep structural faults with the tax and administrative system. According to Taiwan's Administrative Procedure Act, administrative agencies are obligated to investigate facts ex officio and to consider both favorable and unfavorable circumstances for people involved. Yet the National Taxation Bureau failed to conduct its own investigation, denied the parties an opportunity to be heard, and simply copied material transferred from prosecutors to issue enormous tax bills. This blatantly violated the principle of official investigation and proper allocation of the burden of proof under the rule of law, shifting responsibility that should have been borne by the government onto the people, forcing them into the impossible position of proving their own innocence. Even more alarming, investigative authority fabricated, inflated, and false statistics, ignored bank responses and objective evidence, and created the absurd situation where the same fraud was simultaneously labeled as fraud proceeds and tested as business income, severely violating the fundamental legal principle of no double punishment for the same act. The founder of Taijiman submitted dozens of formal inquiries to the tax authority seeking clarification of the taxation basis, yet never received a substantive response. Despite the fact that the case underwent over 10 years of criminal proceedings and were conclusively ruled in 2007 by Taiwan Supreme Court as not guilty, non-taxable, and in full compliance with tax law, the National Taxation Bureau chose to ignore the final judgment and continue to pursue unlawful tax claims. In 2020, it even forcibly and illegally auctioned off Taijima's spiritual practice site and transferred it to state ownership. This was not merely a deprivation of poverty rights, but a serious violation of freedom of belief. When administrative power overrides judicial authority and all avenues of remedy fail, public power ceases to protect the people and instead becomes its most ruthless weapon. In reflecting on such circumstances, I often think of the transformation of Palestine leader Yasser Arafat. In his early years, he believed armed struggle was the only path to securing rights for his people. Yet in 1974, standing before the United Nations General Assembly, he declared, "I have come bearing an olive branch and a gun. Do not let the olive branch fall from my hand." Later, he chose to shake hands with his former enemy, Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin, signing the Oslo Accords. For this, they jointly received the 1994 Nobel Peace Prize. Although the road to peace remains difficult, Arafat's story may remind us the true justice comes from ending violence and correcting mistakes. Like the disciples of Taijiman who have persisted for 30 years, despite a broken relief system. What we seek is not revenge, but for the state to correct its error and restore human rights and dignity. Professor Massimo has pointed out that the Taijiman case is a critical indicator of religion freedom in the contemporary world. If a democratic government can knowingly persist in wrongdoing and refuse to correct itself, allowing unlawful administrative actions to continue harming its people, then what is threatened is not merely a single group, but a credibility of the entire democratic system. Today at this international forum, we call upon the Taiwanese government to confront administrative violence and to end this invisible small cliques work. True social justice does not mean that power is always right. It means that institutions are capable of admitting mistake, immediately stopping harm, and restoring the rights and dignity of the people. And finally, I would like to return to the principle advocated by Dr. Hong. He said only by acting from conscience can injustice be eliminated. So whether it is civilians longing for peace amid war, or the Taijiman disciples who have upheld justice for 30 years under institutional failure, they are all striving for a future in which they can live without fear and be treated with fairness by the system. We are all human in the end. When power is willing to rediscover its conscience, institutions can truly correct their mistake, and society can move forward justice and sustainability. Thank you to everyone who worked for human rights and justice. Let us continue to speak out for truth and fairness. Thank you.
And thank you, Tingni. You addressed the social issue, social justice issue from another perspective. For you, social justice means that every individual respect situation in Gaza, other wars, poverty, gender inequality, denial of human rights are all forms of social injustice, according to you. When public power fails to protect the most vulnerable, social justice is denied. And this is not tolerable. And I can absolutely understand your feelings because I've gone through that sort of experience as many, many other people. 30 years of tax persecution and prosecution, almost, in the case of Tai Jiman, is also a form of a social injustice. It would be understandable to see people using violence against injustice. But you advocate for following Dr. Hong's teaching only by acting from conscience can injustice be eliminated. This is his message. And I would tell you, do not deviate from this line. And I'm sure that you will not do. Thank you again for your contribution to this event. And now I will give the floor to a man, George Chen, a physician. The floor is yours, George.
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Esteemed chairman and the international human rights and legal experts and the friends caring about global justice. Good day to you all. And I'm a physician. In the field of medicine, our mission is to identify the causes of illnesses and to provide treatment to help patients restore health. Governing a country is much the same. The government must identify problems and seek solutions. However, when I step out of the clinic and observe our society, I find some diseases indeed latent within the national system. In traditional Chinese medicine, there is a saying, the greatest doctor treats the country. The mediocre doctor treats the person. The lesser doctor treats the disease. On this significant occasion of the 2026 World Day of Social Justice, I would like to share my perspective as a physician regarding the Tai Jimen case, lasting for 30 years. At its core, this is a fabricated case that violates freedom of belief. It is also a mirror reflecting the true state of our national system. First, leukemia of the national system, when accountability mechanisms fail. In medicine, leukemia is not a lack of white blood cells. Rather, it is a mutation of these cells. They lose their original function to protect the body and even suppress other normal cells, leading to the collapse of the immune and other vital systems. The Tai Jimen case presented a similar situation. The case happened in 1996. The Supreme Court of Taiwan ruled in 2007 that Tai Jimen was innocent of all charges, including tax evasion. The Control Yuan has also conducted multiple investigations, clearly stating that the prosecutor and the National Taxation Bureau committed numerous major legal violations and demanded accountability. Nevertheless, the law-breaking officials were not held accountable but had been promoted instead. In a state governed by the rule of law, the accountable responsibility mechanism is like the immune system. It is responsible for removing dysfunctional cells or legal violations. When the accountability mechanism fails, erroneous administrative actions and illegal tax bills continue to spread in the country. Despite the Supreme Court providing a clear diagnosis of not guilty, the administrative system refused to recognize it, eventually leading to the illegal auction of Taijimen's sacred land in 2020. This is a disastrous consequence of institutional autoimmune disorder. Second, inner upright energy, conscience as preventive medicine of the society. Physicians know that the most effective treatment is prevention. The traditional Chinese medicine principle, when the upright energy resides within, no evil can interfere, applies equally to a nation. If a country lacks the upright energy, injustice and corruption will seize the opportunity to perfect the country. For years, the leader of Taijimen, Dr. Hong Daozi, has promoted the movement of an era of conscience globally. From a medical perspective, this is a form of preventive medicine that combines mental health with social justice. Conscience is the most fundamental internal protection mechanism for every individual. It reminds us to hold our ground, to tell right from wrong when faced with temptation, power, or conflicts of interest. Having practiced Qigong and Taijimen for a long time, I have deeply experienced the importance of physical and mental balance. Practicing Qigong improves the circulation of Qi and blood, which helps me recover quickly from high-pressure work and keeps my mind clear. And this allows me to hear the voice of my conscience at critical moments. When upholding conscience, government officials will naturally stop abusing power for bonuses or performance metrics, and they will no longer turn a blind eye to the grievances of the people. Third, cross-generational social repair, the power of mixed-age environments. Modern society is fast-paced and with information overload, which often leads to internal anxiety and loneliness. However, at Taijimen, I see a social health model worth emulating, a mixed-age learning environment composed of people from all walks of life and with different ages. The younger generation can learn life wisdoms from their elders, reducing the growing pains of social friction. The elderly, in turn, maintain openness and mental flexibility through the vitality of the youth. This mutually supportive interaction is like cells of different functions working in harmony within the body, effectively repairing the indifference and antagonism of modern society. Fourth, responsibility of a world citizen. Redress is the prescription. The core spirit of the World Day of Social Justice lies in redressing injustice. As the Taijimen case is now in its 30th year, it is no longer just a question of one group's innocence. It is an important human rights indicator for a democratic country when facing injustice. From the perspective of the greatest doctor treating the state, redressing the Taijimen case is the necessary prescription to cure institutional chronic illness, revoke illegal tax assessments, and return illegally confiscated assets, establish a truly effective accountability mechanism, take conscience as the core value of public governance, to get rid of the improper systems and outdated mindsets left behind by the authoritarian era. Conclusion: safeguarding global justice with conscience. Justice delayed is a chronic injury to the democratic system. As a physician, I cannot bear to see a patient suffer unnecessary pain. As a world citizen, I cannot remain silent in the face of institutional errors. On this World Day of Social Justice, I sincerely call upon governments and leaders worldwide to use the wisdom of the greatest doctor to face the mistakes bravely and repair the systems. Let conscience be the guide for governance to prevent injustice and fabricated cases from occurring. Only then can we truly build a just society, filled with upright energy, respecting human rights, and safeguarding global health. Thank you all.
And thank you, Doctor. Speaking as a physician, you compared Tajiben case with leukemia, a mutation of cells which lose their original function to protect the body and even suppress other normal cells, leading to the collapse of the immune and other vital systems. Your treatment is to apply the logic of the traditional Chinese medicine, an interesting approach and challenging one as well. So that the traditional Chinese medicine to social justice. That can be summed up with, I would say, a few sayings. I will not repeat everything that you exposed. So a few sayings of wisdom, such as, and I quote, "The greatest doctor treats the country. The mediocre doctor treats the person. The lesser doctor treats the disease." And a second quote, "When the upright energy resides within, no evil can interfere." I think these are two good lessons coming from traditional, wise, yes, sagesse, as we say in French. Sorry for the words. Wisdom, yes, wisdom. And through the long-standing Tajimen case, you courageously expose systemic injustice and the failure of accountability. And you uphold conscience as a form of preventive medicines. Preventive medicines. Conscience, preventive medicines. Interesting concept. For ethical essential, which is essential for ethical governance and personal moral clarity. Your respect for traditional Chinese medicines reflects a holistic worldview valuing balance, prevention, and inner upright energy. And by highlighting mixed age community learning, you also affirm another dimension: solidarity, empathy, and intergenerational harmony. So I would tell you, go health and global justice. Thank you again, Doctor. And now, yes, you were the last speaker of this panel. I will give the microphone back to Massimo Introvignier, who will introduce the last speaker for the conclusions.
Thank you, Willie, and thanks to the DITSI. And now we will have the conclusions of the webinar by Marco Respinti, who is the director in charge of Bitter Winter. And at the end of his remarks, he will introduce the concluding video. So Marco, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Massimo. Thank you. Thanks everyone for this very rich webinar. We are used to rich webinars, but in particularly today, we heard new speakers and very interesting point of view on the Taijiman case. So my duty and pleasure is to offer you some final reflection as a way of concluding. Today, we know we observe the United Nations World Day of Social Justice, and as on previous occasions, we take this opportunity to reflect on the relevance that the UN International Day of Observance have in relation to the Taijiman case, a blatant miscarriage of justice and deeply troubling violation of religious liberty, affecting a peaceful group of law-abiding citizens of the Republic of China in Taiwan. Interestingly, the UN itself has questioned in February 2025, you can find it on the internet, what the term social justice truly means, acknowledging that, quote, in recent years, it has become a significant part of public discourse, often invoked in discussions about equality, human rights, and societal reforms, end of quote. The UN's own answer to this question is that, quote, social justice encompasses a wide range of issues extending from addressing economic inequality to access to education, healthcare, and the protection of human rights to create a world where everyone has the opportunity to thrive, end of quote. The emphasis placed on human rights is, of course, what concerns us most today in relation to the Taijiman case. The UN further specifies that human rights as a vital component of any genuine concept of social justice must include recognitions that individuals have different needs and circumstances, assurance that everyone has access to the resources and opportunities necessary to succeed, the concrete possibility for all individuals to participate in the political, economic, and social life of their communities, and respect for differences among people. Taken together, these elements ensure equity, access, participation, and diversity. A comparison between this definition by the UN and the Taijiman case in Taiwan revealed significant discrepancies, leading to the conclusion that social justice does not prevail in this instance. Indeed, the comparison demonstrates that all the basic tenets of the UN that the UN identifies as constitutive of an authentic realization of social justice have been violated. Let us review the matter. If, according to the UN, true social justice ensures that everyone has access to the resources and opportunities necessary to succeed, the treatment of Taijiman Shifu, or Grandmaster, and Ditsi, disciples, since 1996 has failed to provide them with the resources and opportunities required to thrive. Even though all levels of the Taiwanese judiciary, including the Supreme Court, have cleared the movement of all false charges, Taijiman's sacred land was nationalized for no apparent reason other than an arbitrary decision by certain corrupt bureaucrats who disregarded the judiciary's ruling and imposed severe sanctions on individuals guilty of nothing. As a result, Taijiman has been deprived of land crucial for its spiritual and social activities, thereby violating one of the principles the UN affirms should be guaranteed. If, according to the UN, true social justice ensures the concrete possibility for all individuals to play a role in the political, economic, and social life of their communities, it clearly follows that the treatment of Tajimen Shifuendizi since 1996 has failed to grant them the possibility to play an active role in the public life of Taiwan, or has at least severely curtailed it. When a group of honest and innocent citizens is stigmatized as tax delinquents and even accused of raising goblins, as Taijimen was, their credibility is thoroughly undermined and the public's trust in them is destroyed. How could such a group possibly play a full societal role? If, according to the UN, true social justice is built upon respect for differences among people, it clearly follows that the treatment of Tajimen Shifuendizi since 1996 has failed to grant them the enjoyment of such conditions, subjecting them instead to harsh discrimination. What other term could accurately describe the labeling and targeting of an innocent group of honest citizens than discrimination, when that group is identified, denounced, and falsely characterized as criminal, leading to ostracism and marginalization? I emphasize that all levels of the Taiwanese judiciary have completely absolved Taijimen of even the most serious charges, which were also proven to be fabricated. Yet penalties have been and continue to be imposed on the group without justification, fostering the perception that Taijimen has committed wrongdoing and thereby undermining public trust in its members. This consideration, in light of the surreal case of a group still paying its dues to justice without having committed any offense that could constitute a debt to society, leads us once again to conclude that social justice remains incomplete in Taiwan. Moreover, the entire situation appears to exemplify the heinous practice of the strong preying on the weak. Taijimen is by no means weak in character, will, or determination. It is, however, comparatively weak when faced with the power of the state and its agencies, particularly when the bureaucratic apparatus decides to deploy its full might against a group of citizens whose core values are peace, harmony, and understanding. Taijimen has consistently remained firm in its principle, relying on pacifist arguments and the tools of moral suasion and conviction, and the state has taken advantage of this. Thus, the issue remains gravely unresolved. Taijimen continues to suffer for a guilt it has not committed, and Taiwan cannot claim to be a country where social justice is fully realized. This raises a question for the Taiwanese government in Taipei. Can it tolerate being a country where justice is not accomplished? Can it tolerate being a country where some of its citizens are discriminated against and deprived of their rights? Can it tolerate being a country whose democracy is not truly of the people, by the people, and for the people? This is a question we all leave to the present government of Taiwan, appealing to its intelligence, will, and political responsibility to find a just resolution for Taijimen, one that could finally ensure social justice. The Taijimen case now requires a political solution that ends arbitrariness and official misconduct. For if social justice is denied to even one of its citizens, all citizens of Taiwan suffer. If any citizens of any country in the world is denied social justice, all human beings everywhere are subjected to serious detriments, and it is a global violation of the rule of law. I thank you for your attention, and these words now concludes our webinar for today, where we had new speakers and always challenging food for the brain, as the British say. And we really now conclude with the final musical video. Thank you.